Android students, and welcome back. This video is just a short video to go over some of the concepts used in the Flag Quiz app and just to introduce the application and what it does. So this particular application from the Ditel book is a fun one. It basically is a little quiz and it allows the user to correctly identify country flags. So it's pretty cool. It shows the flag image and it has a given number of guess buttons where one is the correct answer. And they're randomly selected, randomly placed. So, every time you take the quiz, you get a potentially different quiz. And then it shows the progress throughout the quiz. And you can customize, the user can with their settings as to how many guess buttons they have and which world regions are included on the country flag quiz. So here's a screenshot of what it would look like on a phone. So here we have a flag and it says guess the country, and then one of the four is correct. So you can look at this app either on a phone or on a tablet. It does show, if you would view it on a phone-sized device, it only shows it to you in portrait orientation. It forces that. On a tablet, it will show it to you in landscape. It does have an options menu. So if you look back here up at the top, we have this gear. We have a menu behind that gear that is a settings menu item, and it allows the user to go in there and change the number of guess buttons to make the quiz more difficult or easier, because you could, basically I could say, well, I only want 2 buttons, for example. And you can also customize which world regions are included on the quiz. And the neat thing about this particular app is it does look different on the phone versus the tablet-sized device. So you could see here on the left we have a phone, and on the right is a tablet running in landscape orientation. So whereas the phone, when I had mentioned up here at the top, we have this settings icon and we can click to access those preferences where the user would say, well, I'd like, 6 buttons instead of 4, that kind of thing. Those options are over here on the left-hand side, because the landscaped tablet, of course, has more real estate to work with. So instead of putting that as a menu option, it actually just shows it to the left-hand side of the actual quiz. So it's pretty cool that it can do that. And you can see this question 1 of 10, question 1 of 10, showing the quiz progress throughout the quiz. And let me switch gears here, see if I have it up. Yes, looks like I'm actually on question 2 of 10. But you can see it in action here. We've got a flag, and you can see as you select incorrect options, it shows incorrect. It also dims out those buttons so they're no longer available. And then once you select the correct thing, it will finally say incorrect. I don't know if you noticed there, but when you selected an incorrect choice, it also used an animation to shake the flag from left to right, which was pretty cool too. And finally, once you do get it, there was an animation there, if you caught that, that made a circular motion before it brought on the new flag. So that was another animation being used. So again, I'm just going to go through the buttons showing you that shake. Now here we have the animation going to the next question. So you get the idea of how this works. I'm just randomly selecting buttons here as I'm going through. You can see guessing the country. Got a few more here before we get to the end. And you can see that it will actually keep track of how good I am at this, which apparently I'm not good at all. I'm just selecting, not even really reading here, but the flag. We'll find out how good you are at flags, right? There we go. United Kingdom. I knew that one for sure. Okay, so you can go through, where are we at? Question 9 here. We got our last one. Okay, 36 guesses. Wow, that's not good. 27.78% correct. And then you can go to reset quiz and you can take it over again. Up here under the settings, what I was referring to before, you can choose the number of choices so you can make life easier on yourself and say, well, I want 2 buttons instead of 8 guess buttons. And instead of including, I think I had actually messed with this earlier to adjust. Initially, the regions were set and I had um, kind of pared this down to just certain areas. So you can be, super easy and just say, oh, North America, but that doesn't give you too much there. But anyway, you can change these regions and hit OK. As I said, I had actually gone in there and filtered those already. Then when you get back in here, it is going to use those settings. So you can see I actually have, just 2 countries now to select from. So that's kind of fun too. So just wanted to show you what it looks like. I should pause and say, uh, this is a great book. I love the Dietell book. The only thing is, um, you know, we've talked about this before. Android is a constant evolution. It is constantly changing. The publishers really can't quite keep up with it in terms of publication of books. So what I did was in Blackboard, I do have a updated version of the application, which is the standard code base that you see in the book. However, I did have to, tweak here or there. They were very minor tweaks. You may not even notice, um, but I had to make those tweaks because there are times where Android will deprecate a class or um, you know, uh, for example, I had to use the new target. I wanted to bring it up to a new target SDK and a new compiler and all of those things because our course is using a newer version of Android Studio and so forth. So I did upgrade the app, download it from there, unzip it. Hopefully, actually, it should go smoothly for you, but if you run into any problems that you aren't able to resolve, after looking through the materials in the materials folder, let me know. I'll be happy to try to help. That is some of the most challenging part is sometimes just getting the application. I did also want to just pause and say that, this class is different from Android 1 in several different ways. One is that unlike Android 1 where each week you do very small projects that don't have a very wide scope, where you're really focusing on 1 or 2 particular new concepts. This particular class is more project based, and there's a lot of source code, there's a lot of Java code, and we won't always, be touching all of that code. It's more exposure to larger projects, and oftentimes your assignment is to just first of all get that working app on your computer and then modifying it in some way so that you can practice modifying or altering an existing program without breaking it, which quite honestly was my first job as a software developer. Here's this big application that 10 other programmers work on. Don't break it. That's your first goal. Number 2, make this modification. So it is a different pace. The first half of the class, we will do 2 weeks per chapter, and then we're going to switch in the second half of the semester and go back to 1 folder per week. So I just kind of wanted to explain that. There's a lot more code, so you'll be probably actually doing less coding overall. You'll be doing modifications to an existing project where you'll be exposed to a lot more code. Okay, so this is just talking about configuring the quiz. We already did that, so we'll move on. And taking the quiz, I already showed you this as well. Okay, so just a word about the textbook. I'm not going to go over in detail the code. However, if you encounter certain pieces of the code, they're explained pretty well in the book, but some of the concepts are more advanced, more challenging. So please let me know if you have any questions. We can also set up Zoom sessions to talk or chat or in my office hours, either virtually or face to face. I'm happy to help. Um, but the chapter, after we do this test drive of the app, they do what's called a technologies overview, where we'll talk about some of the features that are used in the Flag Quiz app. So, one of the things that you noticed was that we had that options menu, is what we call menus available from that top bar of the screen when the app is running in portrait orientation. So we did see that, and that's something new, and it's really pretty neat. If I flip over here to our project, let me hide some of these things and get them out of our way. Under XML, or I'm sorry, under menu, we have a menu underscore main.xml, which defines a menu with just one item in it called settings. And that's where that's coming from. There's also some code in the Java source code files that is supporting showing a menu, as well as what happens when an item from that menu is selected. So that's one of the neat things about this particular project that it introduces. So it uses some new methods like on create options menu, on options item selected. You're going to see that code in the Java source code to manipulate the menu. So if I flip over here to main activity, we can see that those methods it's referring to are in here, because main activity is the starting point of this application. And I know that, by the way. You open Android Manifest, remember that's located under Manifests. I can see that it is here as an activity. As every activity is added to the Android Manifest, see that it says it is main launcher. That's going to be the starting point of the program, and it manages the menu. So you're going to see code. It's going to go into more detail about that menu, but that is something newish that we haven't seen. Another thing that is newer is this concept of a fragment. We may have been briefly introduced to this last semester, but a fragment's pretty much what it sounds like, where it's like a piece. Specifically, it's a reusable portion of an activity. It's like modularizing your code. Instead of one activity representing one screen or one user interface, you might have a activity where the users or one screen where there's a couple fragments that come together. And this is probably best illustrated with an image here. Let me go back to here. So here we have main activity fragment. I'm going to tell you this one here on the left, that's where it's main activity. I did say that was the starting point, but what it does is it launches a class called main activity fragment. So the main activity fragment.java source code here represents the logic for the actual quiz. So if we would look at the same thing in landscape mode on a tablet, we would have main activity, but we'd have this fragment over here, main activity fragment, representing the quiz, just like over here. But on the left-hand side, we'd have a fragment for the settings. So that's actually settings activity fragment. So the purpose of these fragments is, think of them as modular pieces that you can swap in to allow for more flexibility for the layout. So for example, when you're in, a tablet, you can display, because you have more real estate, you can display two fragments beside each other. So that's the idea. They allow you to have these reusable portions of an activity's user interface that you can use for various screen sizes, interchange them to make more dynamic graphical user interfaces. And behind the scenes, that uses the fragment class. So you'll see that in some of the code. This particular application uses the fragment class, that main activity fragment.java I just showed you that I said represented the quiz's logic. It's a subclass of fragment, which means it inherits all the functionality from fragment. So we can see that here. Extends is the Java way of saying that main activity fragment is a subclass of fragment. And then there's the preference fragment, and that's the settings activity fragment is a subclass of preference fragment. And then there's a third type of fragment that we extend called dialog fragment. If you recall, at the end of the quiz, there was actually a pop-up that told you how good or not so good in my case I did on the quiz. That was a dialog box type thing. That is extending the dialog fragment. And if you look at your project, you don't see anything there with that. So you're like, well, where's that coming from? But that's actually that pop-up that is the answer to how you did on the quiz is built dynamically in the Java code and then popped up, so we don't have that piece to look at as a Java source code file. It actually creates it in one of the other Java source code files and then pops it up. So the thing about fragments are they must be hosted by an activity. So, they reside inside of, if you can think of as an activity, and the activity decides which fragments to display in which scenarios. And each fragment has a life cycle, just like our activities do. In fact, they have similar set of methods that mirror that functionality. Like, for example, fragments have an onCreate, which calls when the fragment's created. They have an onCreate view that's called after onCreate. So there is some similarities between activities and fragments in that they have this life cycle type thing. Now, there are a collection of classes, such as the fragment manager, that are important for managing these fragments. So you'll see fragment manager be used in some of these methods, get fragment manager, find fragment by ID, that are used when it's trying to manipulate the fragments and decide to pop something up or, inflate a fragment, which, by the way, inflate just means, okay, I want to use this fragment. I want it to come up on the screen and be visible. I want to create it to be active. We call it inflating it. Some other items introduced in the technologies overview portion of the chapter, which is Dytel's pattern, the textbook's pattern. We always have this technologies overview at the beginning of the chapter. It talks about some classes. Preference is the main class, and then there's some subclasses, list preference and multi-select list preference. These are utilized in the functionality, oops, wrong screen, here. So when you're setting your number of choices, that's the list preference. Then regions here, this was the multi-select preference. So some of those classes we haven't seen before, and preference managers new that allows us to access them and interact with them. Another thing they share with us is this new folder called the Assets folder, which is kind of fun. Let's pop over there. Okay, so let's close Java, make it a little easier to see here. Assets. Okay, so assets is where we put the images. Okay, now previously we've put images in the drawable folder. The reason why they did what they did in this particular project, because you can still put images in the drawable folder, but unlike the drawable folder where the image has to be at the root of each folder, the assets folder can have these subfolders. Well, that was kind of important because we actually use these subfolders not just as a container, but also to identify a region. So it's basically saying, okay, everything inside all these PNG files are belonging to the region of Africa. And that relationship between file and subfolder is important because it allows that functionality. Remember, we can turn on or off certain regions to be included in the quiz. So that was pretty cool the way they did that. That functionality where you can see that happening and building that is in the Java code. Um, Specifically, all the quiz functionality is under this one here, main activity fragment. Settings activity fragment, we set which regions in some sort of global setting, but main activity fragment is the one that actually builds the quiz. But so that's pretty cool how they did assets. Now for your assignment, you may not have gotten there yet, but you will be taking this project and not creating it from scratch. I actually don't, it's a great exercise to try to create it from scratch, but I wouldn't recommend it as the first thing that you do. A, it can be tricky. I encourage you to create things from scratch and try them out. But for your assignment, you may want to try just loading this, using this, and modifying it first. And then if you get that, then, please feel free to try to do it from scratch. But there's a lot of code here and a lot going on, so I don't want you to think you have to create things from scratch. But anyway, for your assignment, you're to modify this application and make a programming quiz. So your images, instead of being images of flags, would be images of programming code. And there's a lot more information about this in the assignments folder, including a walkthrough of it and guidance as to which types of files you'll actually need to adjust. But I can tell you right now, the assets folder, I recommend just having one folder like programming languages or something like that, and then putting all of your programming languages under there. Now you could get super fancy and say like, oh, object-oriented languages or these languages or those languages, but you get into a lot of images that are needed. We're not going to have the functionality to filter by the equivalent of a region. We're going to just take that out for the assignment. So really just the easiest way would say, okay, we have one programming languages folder, all our programming languages under it. But anyway, that's what the assets folder is all about and where those images reside. So there are some other new files under res, which are pretty interesting. We've got anim. We've seen this before. Anim has animations in it, and this is actually the animation that shakes. It's called a translation. It translates and moves the flag to the left. That's the -5% there. Then to the right, 5%, and then back to the left. So it's actually showing you how it moves the X coordinate. So in other words, the left to right type of display. So that's pretty neat. They have that animation color. They have some specific colors in here set to, I believe that's for the button color, to change the font color if the button is disabled. Drawables, the usual thing there. But we do have a menu, and this is the menu that's being used in our so we have our settings menu that's displayed when we're not in tablet landscape mode. So we've got some interesting things going on. Something else that's interesting about this project is that it basically is going to use the correct layout for phone versus landscaped tablet based on qualified resource, the qualified resource folder. So if I come into res and layout, as you guys remember, that's where the layout files go. And look at content main. See how there's two files here. One, this is the default, and that's for the phone, but this one says to use on screen widths of 700 dp when they're landscape. So this is what's going to be used for, and you can kind of see here, the left-hand menu and then the right-hand quiz for tablets in landscape mode. This is going to be used for phone. So it's going to pick up the correct one based on what device is being used. So that was new. It also used the configuration class, and the reason why that was used in main activity was because it wanted to figure out what orientation the user was using, and it also wanted to figure out whether it was a phone or tablet. The reason why it does this, if you trace through the code, it says if it is a big screen, this is not a phone, and then it checks to see if it is a phone, set it to portrait. So it's basically forcing it to portrait orientation on a phone. So it uses some of these new things from the configuration class, specifying screen size in order to figure out whether or not to set it to portrait orientation. And we've seen toast messages before. They pop up on the bottom of the screen and they say information. And in this particular application, that happens when you make a change to, for example, the regions. It'll pop up and say, I believe it will. Let's try that again. Yeah. Quiz will restart with your new settings. Okay, so when you make a change, it has a toast notification. Couple other things. When the user makes a correct guess, if you noticed, it displays the correct answer for 2 seconds, then displays the next flag. That's pretty important because you don't want it to immediately change. You want the user to be able to see the correct answer for a second. And this is in that fragment that handles the quiz. It uses a handler, and a handler is able to basically do a delay. So by calling post delayed method, it passes what you want to happen, as well as the delay in milliseconds, and it's able to basically kind of wait and then wait the amount of time you specify and then execute what you specify. So that's another new thing used. And we already talked about, I already showed you the anim folder under res that had the animation specified. We'll use some classes, animation util, to load certain animations and set the specific settings and that kind of thing. So you'll see those utilized on that. Let me come back over here for a second. Main activity fragment. You're going to see that in the code that manages the quiz. View animation utils class is actually used for the circular reveal animator. So again, let's go back and guess something. Okay, so when you guess, it holds for 2 seconds, then a circle kind of appeared there where it's basically switching to the next flag. There we go. Circles in, circles out. So that's pretty cool. It's using this create circular reveal method order to do that. So as I said, in the colors folder, it has a list of colors that correspond to button text, is something new. The alert dialog class is used at the end of the quiz to pop up the information about the progress, correct percentage, and that kind of thing. So you're going to see some code in there as well for that. And periodically you'll see sprinkled throughout the code it utilizing a class called log. Log has several static methods that are basically used to put information in your like your logcat tab. I'll show you that in a second. It's at the bottom of your screen in Android Studio, but it's basically putting these messages there for debugging purposes. So let me pop over here for a second. There's an awful lot of code in main activity fragments, so let's take a look at that one. And I'm doing a Control F on my keyboard on my Windows 10 computer. I'm doing a search for log dot, and you can see, for example, it looks like we tried to load images. If you look at the complete code here, there's a try catch. Remember, a try checks, or tries to do something rather. If there is a failure, it checks for a specific type of exception. It's checking for an IO exception. That means it wasn't able to find the image. And it says log.e. So basically this is saying add a log message saying error loading image file. So these messages are going in the logcat, which remember that's down here at the bottom of your screen. Now at the moment I have mostly informational messages come in here. I don't really have errors, but it throws that into that logcat so you can see that information. So That's pretty neat. Now, Logcat does have a lot of other data coming from the system that you didn't specifically specify to write out to, so just be aware of that, that Logcat has a lot of information in it. Yes, so when the app runs in portrait orientation, the app's preferences are displayed in a setting activity that we launch from the menu. And the menu itself, whoops, wrong tab, sorry. The menu itself is actually managed, as I said, from main activity. This figures out what orientation we're having and kicks off the creation of the actual quiz. If you notice here, it creates a main activity fragment right here, and it updates the guest rows, updates regions. You're like, well, where's that coming from? Well, you could search your project, or you could right click. Let me see here. Every IDE is just a little bit different. Go to declaration, and notice it opened main activity fragment and went right to it. So what it was doing there is, let me go back, it creates an instance of main activity fragment, and then it's able to call the method. So this is basically saying create the quiz, update the guest rows based on how many guest rows the user wants, update the regions based on how many the regions are to be included based on what the user wants, and then reset the quiz. So this is basically kicking off and starting up the quiz. So it's managing all that and which fragments should be displayed and that kind of thing. So there is a lot of code. I'm going to stop there. I just kind of wanted to get you started, talk about some of the things that would be included. If you have any questions over the specific code that's introduced in the chapter, please let me know. As I said, I'm happy to meet with you either virtually or in my face-to-face office hours. And then please check out in the assignments folder when you get to that point. Now remember, the assignment's not due to the second of the 2 weeks. First week, you read the chapter, take the quiz, and if you're on the ball, you're getting started on that assignment. The assignment's not due to the second of the 2 weeks, where we're in these set of weeks that are 2 weeks per chapter. But in any case, if you have any issues, please just let me know, and I will be happy to meet or talk with you. Okay? Thank you very much.